Now that we have our Firebase utility library inside of our project, let's actually set it up so that we can start using it in our application. Now, what we want to do is go into our project directory, and we are going to add a new folder in our source called Firebase. Inside of this Firebase, we are going to make a new file called firebase.utils.js. Now, in order to properly use and set up our Firebase utility files or utility methods, we actually need that config object. So if you accidentally lost it somehow, I'll show you how you can navigate back to finding that configuration. We want to go from our dashboard to Project Overview, which is this page. And then you'll see this grid item here. If you click this, you'll see our application. Or sorry, you'll see our Firebase project. So we want to click this and then scroll down. You should see this SDK snippet with the CDN. That object that we want is right here. So we just want to copy this, go back to our Firebase utils, and then we're going to import Firebase from Firebase/app. So by doing this, we're pulling in the Firebase utility library that belongs at this Firebase/app. Now, the reason we do Firebase/app is because Firebase has all of the utility libraries loaded when we included the entire dependency when we installed Firebase with Yarn. But we don't want any that we're not using because they are quite large. So whenever we need them, so in this case, we need auth and storage, we can import them themselves by importing Firebase/Firestore for the database and Firebase/auth for the auth. We always need the base import though, because that keyword is going to give us access to Firestore and auth when we import them in. They'll be just automatically attached to this Firebase keyword. And then what we want to do is we want to set our const config equal to that object that we just stored. And then we call firebase.initializeApp with that config. Now, what I'm about to type next will be quite a bit of code. It will make sense once we start using it. But because it's config, it might seem a little confusing because we are mainly configuring the Firebase utility that we get. All of it is in the documentation on Firebase itself, but these are the ones that we need for Google authentication. So what we want to do is we want to export const auth, which is equal to firebase.auth. So when I mentioned that we imported Firebase auth, that is what we managed to get access to, is the .auth method on Firebase. And we want to export this out anywhere that we would need to use anything related to authentication. Next, we are also going to export the Firestore that we imported the same way that we did with the auth. So we don't need this yet, but it's better for us to just export this for now. Now to set up our Google Authentication utility. So this part is a little bit complicated, but just follow along. We're going to do a const provider equals new firebase.auth.google auth provider. And this gives us access to this new Google Auth Provider class from the Authentication library. It takes a couple custom parameters using the custom parameters method. And what we want to set is prompt select account. What this means is that we want to always trigger the Google pop-up whenever we use this Google Auth Provider for authentication and sign-in. And I'll show you what I mean when we use it. So we're also going to export out sign in with Google method that is equal to a function that calls auth sign in with popup, because sign in with popup takes this provider class that we made, but it takes it for many different types of popups, right? We just want the Google one, but there's a Twitter one, right? There's all kinds available to us in our sign in, but we want to set sign in with popup, and then we want to pass this provider through. Now, we also want to finally export default will be Firebase in case we want the whole library. But you know how I mentioned that there's multiple popups? Well, let's actually configure our Firebase project to allow us to use Google sign-in. And I'll show you how easy that is. So all we do is we go back to our Firebase project and we click this authentication under the develop tag. Here we're going to click set up sign-in method. And under this Google option, we just hit the edit pencil, enable it. We'll select the email that we want project support to have, right? So in case anything goes wrong with Firebase at all, for anything related to support, they're going to send it to this email that you have here. And usually it's the email from your Google account that you use to sign into Firebase. We just hit save. And now it's enabled. We have OAuth enabled for our project using Google. And now we're going to use this sign in with Google inside of our sign in component. So we're going to import it in, sign in with Google from Firebase, Firebase utils, get rid of that .js. And to see how easy it is, we just are going to copy our button, remove type submit, and fire a on click that calls our sign in with Google method. And now if we do sign in with Google, whenever we click it, our button in our application, so let's refresh, we see our button, we click it, and there's the Google prompt. It will load any Google accounts that we already have or the user's already signed in with, and we select it, and Firebase will handle the authentication there. Just like that, we have authentication with Google tied into our application. But how do we actually utilize these users that Firebase is logging in with? Well, let's do that right now.